When a baby was born, the chances of survival weren't very high. We need to think about this. In our ancestors' world, one out of every two children born died before reaching the age of 5. So, how do you think the ones who survived managed to do this? In a world crawling with wild animals, hunger, and disease? The answer is it's not about a single family, it's about a large community. There was a system anthropologists call alloparenting, meaning a child was raised not only by its mother and father, but also by the people around it aunts, uncles, grandmothers, even neighbors who weren't related at all took turns looking after the baby. That's why, of course, when a father went hunting or a mother was gathering food, the baby never stayed alone. This system worked differently in different parts of, for example, in some hunter-gatherer communities in Africa, a baby could be looked after by an average of 14 different adults in its first year after birth. In some indigenous communities in South America, on the other hand, children could spend time from a young age with families they weren't related to, thereby developing a bond toward the entire community. In some mountainous regions of Asia, a similar structure was seen. The whole village was held jointly responsible for a child's nutrition and safety. It wasn't a common situation for a single parent to take on all the responsibility. They would be very surprised if they saw today's lifestyles. But this wasn't enough. Children took on a level of responsibility at a very young age that we couldn't imagine. Even a 6-year-old child would learn to look after their sibling, gather edible plants, and light a fire. By the age of 7 or 8, tasks like carrying water and looking after small animals would also be added. By the age of 10, most children could already track game, perhaps use the weapons of that time, make tools, and even recognize the trail of a dangerous animal. These skills weren't learned overnight, of course. With a little more responsibility given each day, the child was being prepared step by step to behave like an adult. Even play was a survival tool for them. By playing hunting games, children were actually rehearsing the skills of the future. What we call children's play today was, in that world, a real training program. So, what was the biggest danger? It wasn't just disease. Most infant deaths stemmed from infections and malnutrition in the first weeks after birth. In cold climates, hypothermia, and in hot regions, thirst and diarrheal diseases posed a major threat. In some regions, predators were also a real danger. That's why babies and small children were almost never left outside unsupervised. But the real long term danger was breaking away from the group. A single child or family had very little chance of surviving alone. Community meant shared food, shared knowledge, and shared protection. A child's safety was measured by the number of people around them. The more eyes, the less danger. What's interesting is this. Some archaeologists are finding traces of special care given to children in ancient cemeteries. For example, child skeletons with healed broken bones must have required months of care. In some excavations, skeletons of children who were understood to have been born with disabilities but lived for years are also found. This shows that the child, even though unable to produce any contribution, was not excluded by the community but was fed and protected. In fact, in some graves, it has been determined that children were buried with the same care as adults, even, for example, with more ornamental items. This also reveals how valuable they were seen within society. These findings show that the past also had a much more compassionate side than we think. This also shows that that world wasn't as cruel as it appears to us. On the contrary, survival was built upon love and collective sacrifice. Transition periods were also very different from today. When a child reached 12 or 13 years of age, they were no longer considered a child. In some communities, this transition was celebrated with ceremonies. The child would take on adult responsibility overnight. In some cultures, this meant passing a physical test. In others, it was just a symbolic acceptance ceremony performed in front of the community. This rapid transition may seem harsh to us, but it actually allowed the child to have a purpose and role at an early age. That sense of purposelessness that young people often feel in the modern world was something seen much less in those ancient societies because everyone had a clear place and contribution within the community they had to. Today, we generally see raising a child as the job of one or two people: mother, father, maybe grandmother, grandfather. That's often it. When a parent becomes exhausted, there is no longer a whole village to ask for help from. Most of the time, there's just one room alone, one responsibility alone. But for most of human history, this was never the case. Perhaps what we need to question is this: in this process, where we've isolated ourselves, did we lose something that old village taught us? What do you think? Should raising a child really be one person's job, or were our ancestors smarter than us about this? Let's discuss it in the comments.